This is episode 7 of the Be Happy Abroad podcast. Today we are discussing an extremely important topic, which is setting boundaries. We are exploring this with an example case that might seem familiar to many internationals: language, and what it means when people switch to their local language, with the result of some feeling excluded. Hello and a warm welcome to Be Happy Abroad, how to live a fulfilling and meaningful life as an international. My name is Franziska Luxhoy and I'm your host. Each week we explore proven strategies and insights to help you adapt, connect and thrive abroad, no matter where in the world you are. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform so you don't miss out. And without further ado, let's dive right in. There is one thing that I'm hearing a lot here in Denmark, and I'm sure it is just as much an issue in other countries. And that is the thing with language, especially at workplaces. It is a difficult one to solve because, now, let's look at it from both sides. And if you are in that situation, if that is a frustration for you, may it be as an international feeling excluded at your workplace or as a local suddenly having to switch language, then please go into this episode with an open mind. Try to see the other perspective. And even if this is not the challenge you are having right now, there will be many powerful gold nuggets for you in this episode as well. So keep hanging. Now, what does the language issue look like from the perspective of the international? You just packed up your whole life and moved to a different country, excited to start at your new job. The colleagues are welcoming, that first day felt good and you're looking forward to this new challenge. Or maybe you've been living in this country for a while and finally found that job you wanted. So excited to get started. And then, as things settle down a bit, you discover that even though your job is in English, even though the corporate language is English, there is a lot you miss out on. The talk at the coffee machines, the conversations at lunch, but even in some meetings, people would switch to the local language. Maybe sometimes you even suspect you aren't invited to some meetings because that would require everyone to speak English. It feels like you're there to do a job, but you're not truly included. You don't feel seen and respected as a whole person, rather as a human resource. You don't truly feel part of a team or company, and you definitely don't feel like you belong. Now, the perspective of the local colleague. You've worked for this company for many years in your native language. You haven't used your English for years and feel quite rusty and insecure. You lack the words to really express yourself. And now you have this new international colleague. They seem like a nice person and you would like to get to know them, but you feel quite self-conscious and don't know where to start. There is this challenge with the language, and on top of that, you're maybe also insecure as to which questions you could ask. Would it be seen as too personal or invasive? Perceived like you're curious about something that's none of your business. And then there are the work settings. You feel very competent in what you do. You've been doing it for many years with success, but not in English. You don't have the words you need in English and don't feel you can do your job quite as well. You definitely didn't ask for that. And even though you also find it exciting, it does make you feel challenged and totally out of your comfort zone. So those were two scenarios of how this might go. And of course, there are countless variations to it. If you hear this, it might seem like a gridlock. Both sides have their own perception, thoughts, and feelings, and it is hard to break out of that perspective. But the thing is, typically, there is no ill-intentioned motivation from either side. But when observing the talk going on about it in different groups on social media and also in public posts, I do often get the impression that people think there is. The question often becomes, why do they keep doing that? And the reason is that there is a lot of frustration piled up on both sides. So, how do we solve this? As this is a podcast for internationals, now we are going to focus more on the international perspective. Also, for the international affected by the situation, the impact is higher, most probably at least, because it has so much to do with feeling like you belong, with feeling integrated, with feeling psychologically safe. The question that we often ask in this context, that I've already mentioned just before, and this is true for many kinds of frustrating situations, is why do they keep doing that? And you can hear there is some blame and judgment in this question. They are doing something wrong, unkind, frustrating. So, what happens if we flip that question to, why do you keep allowing it? You might think now, whoa, now this is provocative. Now it should be the international's fault? My fault? But hear me out. Instead of being triggered by it, see this as a shift taking back your power. If you ask the question, why do they keep doing that? You are giving away your power by putting all responsibility to the other part. Sometimes that's a default reaction because it feels easier to do, blame someone or something else. The thing is, by doing that, you also give away your power and thereby your opportunity for change. Your circle of control becomes very small and you become helpless. What's the impact of asking yourself, why do I keep allowing it? This gives you a role in the whole scenario. It gives you responsibility and it enlarges your circle of control, how you can act and how you can start changing your situation. So, why do you keep allowing it? There can be many reasons. It is definitely not easy to speak up, to set boundaries, to take up what feels like a confrontation. And also, living abroad feels hard enough to begin with. Do you really have to take responsibility for all those things? That is what I often hear as a reaction. Do I really have to take responsibility for this? And no, you don't. But if you do, you also have a bigger chance of achieving what you want. Ultimately, this is about becoming aware of your needs and boundaries and expressing them. Because no one has ever walked in your shoes, so they might not be aware of what is hurtful to you, what makes you feel excluded and like you don't belong. Now, to the practical part. Let's explore how you can start changing something about that frustrating situation. In this episode, we are continuing with the case of language at the workplace, but the approach can absolutely be adapted to any kind of situation where you, for example, feel disrespected, not included, not seen, and would like to show up with more self-confidence and make yourself seen and heard. The first thing I unpack with clients in this situation is to evaluate, is there any bad intention in others not speaking English, but speaking their local language instead? I've once had a client where it almost seemed like no one bothered to speak English. All my client got was the minimal information necessary to do the job. Otherwise, they were completely excluded. And that did not even only concern the social talk, but also meetings, where they just were told the most important information discussed that was deemed relevant for the job. So once you're clear about what you're dealing with, reflect on how you would like the situation to be in as much detail as possible. In which situations do you think it would be okay for you to be immersed in the local language? And in which situations would you really prefer the language to be English? In 2006, during my first stay in Denmark for my studies, I also attended a very intense Danish course, and I was working part-time and then during the summer at the same company for a full-time internship. Most of my job was in my mother tongue German, and I also talked to my direct boss, usually in German. At lunch, the whole team gathered and they tried to speak English, which I really appreciated, especially in the beginning. What I noticed was that often they would switch to Danish as soon as they couldn't come up with a specific word in English. I think that's a very common situation because the one word that you are saying in a different language just triggers that other language in your brain, especially if that other language is your stronger or dominant language. So then they would continue in Danish until someone reminded again, hey, English again. So first of all, in that situation, there was definitely no bad intention at all. I could clearly see that. And then I didn't usually say anything because to me that also felt like a great opportunity to hear some Danish and try to understand as much as possible. A great opportunity to practice. But here is the thing about boundaries. What was fine for me might be a no-go for someone else, and they might feel disrespected or ignored. So step 2 here was to draw up that ideal situation and from that scenario formulate your boundaries. What are you willing to accept or not accept from others around you? Also reflect in detail on the emotional impact of the situation. How does it make you feel and how does it impact maybe even your work results? Then how you proceed from here, I would say, depends on what you evaluated in step 1 and in how far you feel comfortable to start setting your boundaries in bigger ways right away. So the client I mentioned before, who really was excluded from a lot of also very relevant conversations at the workplace, started by picking out some colleagues they felt they could trust and opened up about their feelings and that the situation was weighing on them heavily. So if you have colleagues you feel you can trust or build that trust, and if that, for example, feels like the next aligned action, it could be an option. Kind of finding allies who you talk to first and who might even become sort of ambassadors for your situation. Once they are more aware, they could chip in for you and help you with the issue. Although that shouldn't be the foremost intention of having this talk with an ally. It's rather to start opening up one smaller place instead of starting to set boundaries in, for example, meetings. In many social situations, if that is your biggest challenge, starting to talk to just one person is also an excellent way to show interest, to show that your lack of participation is not because you don't want to talk, but simply because you cannot talk in the local language. So seek out those colleagues who are more open to talking English and try to be close to them in these types of situations, to start conversations and build relationships in a smaller way. And then last but not least, muster up your courage and start setting your boundaries if necessary, especially if you feel that your work is impacted by you not being able to understand fully. So for that client, for example, the challenge was that they didn't have much insight into what was going on outside of their own little box. Because they couldn't follow along in meetings, they didn't have a bigger picture at all. This is both unmotivating, and also most jobs can be done more efficiently if you do have some idea of what's going on around you. So in that case, it was crucial to set these boundaries. And what can that look like? Well, based on what you mapped out for yourself before, in step 2, have some very clear sentences ready that are non-confrontational, as factual as possible, that simply state what you want or expect. After all, you were hired to do a job, probably with the awareness that this would mean switching to English as the daily language. It's okay to ask for that. It isn't easy and requires courage, but it will pay off. To conclude here, I would like to go back to the flip from the beginning, from why do they keep doing that, to why do you keep allowing it? Taking some responsibility here in how we are met is crucial in any kind of social setting, really. So consider how you show up, which sides of yourself you are showing. If you want to be met with curiosity, are you curious about others? By deciding how you show up, you can truly empower yourself. If this episode triggered any thoughts for you that you would love to reflect upon and get some feedback around, let's talk. As always, I'm here for you at podcast@behappyabroad.com or click the link in the show notes to book a complimentary call. This was Be Happy Abroad, How to Live a Fulfilling and Meaningful Life as an International. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, leave us a review and share it with your international friends so they too can embark on a journey to fill their life abroad with freedom, joy, love, and happiness.